Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of BitNote. This is David Collins playing video game and video game soundtracks, and in this show I'll be playing music from a very nice little indie game that's got quite a nice feel to it. It is Brother: The Tale of Two Sons. Have a listen, and I hope you enjoy. Hey, so thank you for listening and hope you enjoy. We'll talk about the great little game that I came across recently called Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons. It is developed by Starbreeze Studios, who I'm more inclined to recall for their first-person shooters such as Chronicles of Riddick: Escape from Butcher Bay and The Darkness, and a few other games where you go around and generally shoot stuff. They were a pretty successful studio, and they worked on the basis of the fact that, if people wanted a game made, then they'd contract them to make the game. It's kind of an interesting model because it means that instead of actually, living or dying depending on the profits of the game, you're guaranteed to get a nice solid lump sum, and you can just make the best game you can and make the money and just keep going on. And they're professional and pretty much. They're also Swedish, by the way. But what they've developed with Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons is a very different sort of game. And before I get into the differences, why don't I play the main theme to this show, to the game? It's quite a different tone, quite a different theme, quite different pretty much everything. And it's part of the reason is they brought in a person from the outside to help. Instead of just having a regular game designer, they brought in a movie director, but usually that goes horribly. But why don't I play a bit more of the theme first and follow up a bit more about how the game developed. So this is Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, and I'll start with the main theme, which was composed by Gustaf Grefberg. Have a listen. and that was the main theme from Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons. As I said, it was composed by Gustaf Grefberg, and the game itself was developed by Starbreeze Studios. So, with a game quite like that, what sort of mood does it evoke? Well, in my opinion, it evokes very, kind of strange, hallowed, almost otherworldly sort of feel to it, and that works very well because that's kind of sort of the game that Brothers is. Essentially, you're starting in this you find yourself starting at this little house on the outskirts of a town, and essentially, of course, you and your brother are there, but your father, unfortunately, is very, very sick. So essentially, you've got to put him onto the cart and take him down to the doctor and make sure that he's okay. So there's kind of like a bit of a medieval thing, but a bit of a fantasy land. But as the game starts, you suddenly realize something that's very, very surprising, and that's the fact is that there are two brothers on the screen. The camera's kind of looking down. It's a very nice 3D rendered environment, kind of atmospheric. Oh, and you learn a bit about how their mother has died, so this is kind of their last parent. And to quote the importance of being earnest, to lose one could be considered misfortune, but if they lose their father, they're damn well careless at this stage. So the brothers try to just get on top of their game and get their father down to the doctor as fast as possible, lest they be accused of being very, very careless sons. But, when the game actually starts, you suddenly realize, and by the way, it starts at very quickly time, no long cutscenes, thankfully, you suddenly realize you're controlling both brothers at the same time. Wait. You see, if you've looked at a modern video game controller, and they've been this way since the DualShock, although the Dreamcast kind of bucked the trend, but then everyone else did it, is that they've got two analog sticks. As you recall, analog sticks are the little sticks that pop out of the controller. You put your thumbs on them, and you can move it left and right, and by moving it a bit, you can make the character walk, and all the way you can make them run. So they're like little thumb joysticks and stuff. So most controllers have one on each side, and then some triggers and a few other buttons. You suddenly realize that while one thumbstick controls one brother, the other thumbstick or analog stick controls the other brother, and so you're controlling two different characters on the screen at the same time. Okay. Then the triggers, fortunately one trigger makes an action of one brother, and another trigger makes the action of the other brother, and so essentially you have to get one brother to the front of the cart and press the action button to pick up the cart, the other brother to the back of the cart, press the button to make it the back of the cart, and then you've got to direct this cart with your father on it, still coughing, because, it's a fantasy game, so I'm not actually going to describe the degrees, but still coughing of this terrible sickness all the way down this rickety path, and you're suddenly starting to realize, okay, I see what it is. I have to control one brother at one time to do a task, and then, of course, you get to this fairy thing, so you have to get them onto the father onto it, and then use one brother to hit the lever to make you go across and all this sort of stuff. And then you got this cliff, and so one brother has to act as a step for the other brother, says you could get him up. So you're basically a single player co-op game. So co-op is cooperative. It's usually when two players play the same game cooperatively, and if you've played like Uncharted 2 for instance, they do a bit of that. You can have either one character is controlled by the AI computer, or else it's two people playing together. And for instance, if there's like a cliff, you get one player to go at the bottom of the cliff and then press a button to give the others a boost, and the other player goes up and gets boosts onto the top, and then when they're on the top they push down a rock or a step ladder so the other player can go up. It's very much cooperative sort of gameplay. But this is the first time I think you've actually played a cooperative game where you're meant to control both characters at the same time to basically help yourself, or have the two brothers help yourself. And it continues that way. You essentially manage to get your father, through a couple of, almost standard kind of puzzles, get your brother to the doctor, where the doctor gives you a scroll that apparently says a tree where your father will get the juice of life and be able to survive. But when I played it, I could never quite see what was written on that scroll, so I just kind of said, well, okay, it's something that'll probably save the father's life. So realize that both brothers then have to go on an epic journey across a great big fantasy land in order to get the thing, which turns out to be water from a tree, that they can bring back and save their father's life, and then everything will be well. But of course it'll never be that simple, because this is not that sort of game. And so they go off, and essentially you're controlling each brother at the same time. You can have them go in different directions, so that suddenly the camera zooms back and to allow them, and then suddenly can't do it any farther, and then they'll stop it. It always reminds me of Micro Machines when they do it, when you've got a top-down perspective and it zooms out to accommodate them going apart, but that finally if they go too far and the game tells you about that. But with Micro Machines it was a multiplayer game where the objective was to go so far ahead the other person fell behind the screen. In this case it's just forcing you to keep the brothers together, which changes. So you're controlling the two brothers, and you start exploring the village, and it's nice. And you find that if you interact with one brother with the person, it'll have one response and the other, and that's kind of nice. So it's like, if there's an old man, if you interact with the elder brother, he's like chatting and and everything, and if it's the younger brother, he'll just jump up and like rock the rocking chair back and forth and do all this sort of stuff. And it's fun that you see this sort of personality with them, how like, and then of course they have some with the musical instruments. The older brother actually screws up in the musical instrument, but the younger brother suddenly is able to play a lively tune, and it's a very nice way of getting through the personality of the brothers without actually doing pointless and long and everything exposition. But of course, as you go, you realize that the brothers each have their own attributes. For instance, at one stage, the smaller brother can like squeeze through the bars of that are spaced widely apart enough and then help, and then of course the older brother can swim, which the younger brother can't. So if you want to get across water, the elder brother goes first and the young back. So a lot of the game is like this. Sometimes it's just more puzzle stuff. You have to coordinate to get the right brother in the right position to put the right switch. Then the other brother comes across, and you're just doing this whole like thing of them helping each other to try to get it. All the puzzles are pretty straightforward. Sometimes it's like there's a dog, so you need to distract him with one brother while the other brother goes across, then gets to safety. Then he distracts the dog, and then the other brother goes across, and they kind of like do a sort of a lockstep. And another part of the game, they're kind of like they're doing a bit of orienteering, and so they basically tie a rope around their waist, and then they kind of swing each other apart. So it's very much a whole cooperative thing about how the two of them work together, and the puzzles, which is a very light variant puzzle game, is a lot of fun. At one stage, of course, it gets a little fun when you end up helping an inventor and get a nice little flying contraption, and then this really nice song plays. I'm going to play it for you now, and it's called Winged Hope, same composer, same game and everything, and I'll talk a bit more about the game then. Have a listen. And that was Winged Hope, and I just realised I confused the Winged Hope track with the Flight into Memories track. Oh dear gosh, how will I ever survive? But yeah, so the game has quite a nice feel to it, and the environments you go through are kind of beautiful. There's some of them seem a little standard fantasy and everything, great vistas, sun, and then suddenly it gets dark, and then there are wolves that their eyes glow in the light, and you have to get help and everything. And one really disturbing but strong part is basically when you walk through what seems like a giant's battlefield. So when giants go to war, great big things, well, this is kind of, you walk through the aftermath, basically. It's not pretty. It's pretty much as bad as you might expect, and possibly even worse. So you walk through but a lot of them are still beautiful, and it is, like I said, the fairy tale, because they're monsters and ogres and these little flying critters and everything, and it's all and crazy crazy inventors and everything, and it's kind of pretty beautiful about it. So I was saying earlier that one of the reasons it's got a bit of a different feel possibly is because they brought in a different person, and the person they brought in was Joseph Fares, a movie director, surprisingly enough, and he basically grew up in Lebanon, moved to Sweden where the game development company is, and he's directed a fair few comedy movies, and also one that was a bit more dramatic and based sort of on about a child who leaves Lebanon during the civil war and goes to Sweden, which, as you can see, was somewhat based in his own life. So the problem is, if you've ever looked at movie directors coming to video games, it rarely works out that well. I mean, Steven Spielberg, of course, acclaimed director who, of course, did Bloom Blocks, but yeah, who really follows Bloom Blocks for anything other than being a Steven Spielberg game. And John Woo did Stranglehold, and people weren't keen on it, and then pointed out, hey, well, wait a sec, Max Payne did something like that, and they kind of did it better and everything. So whenever a director comes and starts, engaging in a video game thing, it usually doesn't work out that well, partially because it's just a completely different, Benicio del Toro's the great movie director who does creepy stuff. I forget exactly what he did in video games, but it all just kind of collapsed and didn't work out that well. So a lot of what happens is when movie directors come to games, it just doesn't work out. But Joseph Fares was different because, for one key thing, he was a hardcore gamer. He liked playing video games. It wasn't just some creative who thought he could come into an industry that works by completely different rules, completely different emphasis, and completely different thing, and think they can make everything better. He was a guy who loved video games and was, wanted to make good video games, and he made good films, and he was willing to go on, and it actually showed off. And do you want to know something really interesting about Fares? When I was listening to an interview from him, he said that, he played a lot of games, and he loved Heavy Rain, he loved Kojima's Metal Gear Solid games, and he loved a lot of games like that, but he felt that they were too cinematic. They were too much like movies. I mean, games trying to be like movies has been a long-running theme, but if an actual movie director complains and saying that they're trying to be too like movies and have too much long cutscenes, then things have gone a little too far. And he didn't like the idea of watching a 20-minute cutscene, which thankfully shows in Brothers, because most of the narrative is told by the stuff you do or characters you interact with, thankfully. So we had a guy who was both a movie director, who was actually liked video games and actually really felt for them and didn't want to do some crazy movie stuff. And it was him who came up with the idea of controlling two different characters and developed a lot of artistic aspects along with that. One thing that kind of surprised me is he actually got a lot of pressure from people to say, why didn't you make an actual full-on co-op, let different people control it? And he felt, no, the whole point of this game is that one person controls both brothers, that they guide them through it. And indeed there's a bit at the end which everyone mentions, but I can't really spoil because I'm not that bad a person, where they were actually talking a bit about this stuff, and it was saying the fact that you were mostly controlling two characters, and then the rules sort of change, and how the game adapts to that's a big part of the narrative. And I can't really say what it is, but a lot of people remember it, and even I do, as a major part of it. And he really wanted to preserve it, and it just wouldn't have worked if two different people were controlling each different brother. And so he felt that this was important. But he got a lot of pressure from people who just, who were familiar with this. I mean, keep in mind, Starbreeze Studio actually acquired Overkill, who actually made the Payday video games, and those games are games that live and die by their co-op, by playing with other people who you're with, either not normally in the same room but often online. So the pressure he was probably under to make Brothers like an actual multiplayer game was pretty strong, but he held fast to his belief. He believed in artistic expression, artistic freedom, that even though there's always a commercial aspect, at the end of the day games are art, and just forcing it into that they're an art, just force that the art and the business just have to meet and have to understand each other, and that if people who really, he apparently had experience of people who really didn't understand what was going on coming in and making decisions, and that's something he resisted with this game, and I think the game is better for it. So, why did I actually play the music track I meant to play there, which was Flight into Memories. Have a listen. and that was Flight into Memories by Gustaf Grefberg from Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons. So just a bit word about Gustaf. He actually did a lot of composition in the Amiga demo scene, which is actually pretty awesome because when you're making music on Amiga, you need to be as much a bit of a programmer as anything else. And of course, I always like my Amiga, but there he is. And he's worked on with Starbreeze Studios and a lot of other games they made, such as The Darkness, and made some and Escape from Butcher Bay, and made a lot of good music for that too. So just to wrap things up before I play it, Brothers is very nice. It's pretty much downloadable on nearly every platform out there, so just check your digital download stores of whatever, whether PlayStation Network, Xbox Live, Steam if you're on the PC, and I don't know, maybe probably a few others as well. And I might as well leave it at that. So I'm going to leave with the last track, which is called Naia. It's named after the elder brother, and yes, apparently the brothers actually have real names. I only found this out by looking online because they speak through the entire game in a Mediapi language, which I didn't mention, but I suppose I didn't really need to, and adds to the amount of games out there that do have Mediapi languages. But I'll just leave it at that. So it's kind of a touching track, and it's because it happens at a very emotional part later on in the game. The game is never too explicit, but there are some major things that happen in it, and I'll just give you the track now. So this has been David Collins with BitNote. Thank you for listening.